morning. My name is Darla, and I will be your conference operator today. At this time, I'd like to welcome everyone to the CA Process Automation Community Webcast. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question-and-answer session. If you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw your question, press the pound key. Thank you. Mr. Henry Taylor, you may begin your conference.
Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where in the world you are. Welcome to our next community webcast. I'm really glad to be able to introduce Gordon Brandyberg, who I'm sure most of you know, who's the product manager for CA Process Automation. He's going to talk us through what is new in release 4.2.2. And he's going to discuss mainly the key topics or key issues that were addressed in this release, as well as any new features that they're delivering. And he's also going to discuss considerations for the upgrade process, which I think could be really, really useful and helpful. So I'd like to pass over to Gordon.
Okay, thanks, Henry. So, one of the reasons I wanted to take this opportunity to talk to our 4.2.2 release, which is essentially 4.2 Service Pack 2, it's somewhat unusual for us to do this for something that's denoted as a service pack, but there's some there's more stuff that went into this service pack than we would typically put into a service pack. And it has ramifications on, obviously, the capabilities that are available, as well as the upgrade process specifically for 4.2.2. So with that, I'll just jump right into it. And we'll start with some of the new and updated capabilities that went into 4.2.2. Now, most of these capabilities and enhancement requests actually went into the service pack because we had already started work on our next release, and we had completed those stories as part of our earlier sprints as part of that release. But when we decided we needed to release a service pack to address some key issues we were seeing in the field, we decided to go ahead and incorporate those stories that had already been completed, specifically because a number of them were direct enhancement requests from the user community, as well as features that really complemented some of the bug fixing work that we were implementing. So, in terms of all the new and updated capabilities, the majority, if not all of them, were actually things that we were planning for a future release, but we had completed and were able to go ahead and incorporate in this service pack. So the first set of items has to do with changes we made to agents. And the major thing that we've done in 4.2.2 is we've removed the heartbeat mechanism. So in all previous releases of PAM, if you deployed agents, there was a heartbeat that the agent would send out to essentially let the orchestrator or the domain orchestrator know that it was available. And then the orchestrator would process those heartbeats and use that to update the configuration status, whether the agent was up or down in the configuration browser. And then any touch points associated with those agents would have their state updated to reflect the status of the agents. And when you went to perform an operator, if the touch point was green according to that, those statuses, it could execute. If it wasn't, you wouldn't be able to execute the operator. It wouldn't even try to execute. So, after some extensive discussion and analysis, we found that, one, the status oftentimes was not correct because it was only a periodic update, and you could, decrease the period with which and any agent, sent its status, so it could be 5 minutes, an hour between updates from a particular heartbeat. And as we scaled out the number of agents associated with the domain, processing of those heartbeats became quite expensive and limited the ability at which we were able to scale. So what we decided to do was to remove the heartbeat mechanism altogether. Now when configuration changes are made within the configuration browser, essentially what we will do is we will send out those updates to all agents. And then if additional changes are made within, I think, there's like 2 minutes or 5 minutes, we'll essentially have a period where no additional updates will go out for the next 5 minutes, and then if something has changed, it will then update again. So it's not like if you make a whole bunch of changes, it's going to constantly go out sending updates to all the agents. You eventually have some window with which you can make changes to your configuration, and then all of those changes will be rolled up and pushed out in one update. That also means that operator execution is no longer tied to the status of a touch point. So if you have a touch point configured against an operator, as long as it can resolve where that touch point needs to go, whether it's maps to an agent or a host group, as long as it can resolve that, it will then attempt to execute the operator against the associated touch point and its agent or host group. Because we removed the heartbeat, now in the configuration browser, we don't show icons that reflect red or green for the individual agents or orchestrators. So if you wanted to get a status of your agent, instead of going to the configuration browser and seeing it reflected there, we've added an agent console that can be launched from within the configuration browser. And on demand, you can query for agent status from all or a partial set of the agents that you have in your group. And today, the only functionality we have in the agent console is the ability to request status. But over time, we do plan to enhance this with additional capabilities as well. And as a direct result of removing the heartbeat, we also did some additional agent scalability work and certification. And we've now certified the simplified agent communication model. That's the model that uses WebSockets. In that we've been able to get that certified with 4,000 agents working against a 2-node domain orchestrator with using both the F5 load balancer as well as the Nginx load balancer. And just to note, we were planning to remove the old mode of agent communications in our next release. We've held off on that, and so in 4.2.2, you still have the option of using what we call the deprecated mode of agent communications, the old bidirectional transient communication link methodology, or you can move with the simplified agent communication model where the agent essentially establishes a communication socket to the orchestrator, and that socket is persisted, and all communication is now sent down that persistent socket. In terms of new capabilities for the engine, the first thing we've done is previously when we were doing load balancing, the load balancing was actually done at a operator level. So what the engine essentially would do is it would break down all the various processes that we're currently running and created a pool of operators that were eligible for execution. And then it would round robin, or actually not round robin, it would just dynamically allocate individual operators to a specific queue on a given node within the cluster. And long story short, what that meant was, let's say if you had a 2-node clustered orchestrator and you had 10 processes running, there was no guarantee. In reality, in most cases, you would not see, a even distribution of processes across each node. So you wouldn't see 5 processes running on one node and a separate 5 processes running on the other node. In 422, in order to essentially remove what we called a master node dependency that we had in our configuration, we've now altered the load balancing so that it is no longer at the operator level, but it's at the process level. So now, as long as you have at least two processes running, if you have a 2-node cluster, you will see symmetric load balancing between those nodes. So in addition to getting symmetric load balancing at the process level, this change has also improved the performance or the execution throughput of processes and the associated operations, as well as the recovery process. So this has allowed us to essentially, when PAM comes up and it tries to recover processes that were already running, that recovery process is now more efficient and faster. Another change that we've made within the engine itself is we've optimized the archiving and execution engine, and this is a significant change in how the PAM design works. So previously, when a process instance completed, we would leave that process instance in the runtime table, and that runtime table is what the engine would use to obviously query and update existing operations and processes that were still running. And the larger that table is, the less efficient queries and updates against that table would be. At the same time, when the archive engine would look to see what processes are completed, that I can now move into our archive system, it would need to compete with the execution engine for access to that runtime table, which is also unnecessarily large because they're both running instances and completed instances in that table. And so it essentially caused the the runtime engine to be slower than it needed to be, as well as the archiving engine to sometimes not only degrade in performance, but in certain drastic instances, it would cause archiving to fail. And when archiving starts to fail, then you just continually have a never-ending increase in the growth of that runtime table. So what we've done is we've redesigned this so that there's essentially a staging table that completed instances are moved into as soon as they're completed. And what this does is obviously it keeps the runtime table relatively small, and only the execution engine is querying against it for processes that are still in the running state, as well as now there's a separate table that the archive engine can operate against and perform the archiving without any contention from the execution engine. And finally, the third thing that we've done in terms of engine optimization, we've completely redesigned the events mechanism. There were some bottlenecks that we had that caused delivery of certain events to be unreliable in certain cases, and just the overall processing and performance to be extremely slow. So after the redesign, what we've seen is about an 1,000% improvement in terms of how quickly we can send and consume events relative to previous implementations of the send event mechanism. So in terms of DARs and enhancement requests, I think we ended about 8 or 9 DARs and internal enhancement requests as part of the 422 release. Starting with, we added a function for forms that essentially allows you to hide a specific field within a script. So now if you need to dynamically hide or show a field, you can do that from within your script using this function. We've also modified the script editor button so that it's always accessible. You can always click on it and access the script editor regardless of whatever widget is selected in the form editor. Within the dataset editor, we've modified a few things here as well. You can now save empty pages, so if you just kind of want to highlight or outline, this is the flow of my data set, and here's the 6 different pages I want, but you aren't ready to assign variables to all of those pages. You can define the pages, save the empty pages, and now come back and add variables to them. Also, if you define arrays now and you realize instead of it being a string, you need to make that an int or vice versa or some change of like that. Previously, you would essentially lose the array altogether. You would lose all the dimensions of the array. We've now modified it so that it will at least retain the size. If you specify the size of array, you'll use the actual values, obviously, as you change types, but the actual structure and dimensions of the array will be retained. And the last thing we've done is we've also added the ability to reorder variables in a data set, something you could do in 3.1 when we implemented this in 4.0. We didn't provide that capability, so we've added that capability now in the 4.x code line. For the mail module, previously, if you needed to specify a specific SMTP port, server port, you had to do that as a configuration item in Oasis config properties. It was a variable you would need to edit there. What we've done now is we've surfaced that in the mail module UI itself within the PAM UI. If you have that configured in Oasis config, when you upgrade, you will see the value there reflected in the mail module. But then going forward, whatever's configured in the UI will take precedence over anything that's configured in the Oasis config properties. We've also added 2 new operators. So we had a request to add SSH key-based authentication for file upload and file download. So what we've done is just add two specialized operators for those specific actions, and they're named SFTP file upload and SFTP file download. Another request that we've had for a while is, in our oasis.config properties file, there are several standard configuration items that we have, but we don't have, previously we didn't have comments for those standard items. And in addition to that, if you added your own comments, when you would upgrade PAM, those comments that you added would be overwritten. What we've done in 4.2.2 is added comments for, I think, all of the standard properties that we have in Oasis config, as well as added support so that if you add your own comments on upgrade or reinstallation, we won't overwrite those comments that you put into the config file. For our users who are using Unix, one of the things that we've had a request for was for the run script operator. Previously, we would always execute that under K-shell. However, if I was running this under a specific user, ideally I would run the script under the shell that was configured in that user's user profile. So now the operator will try and determine what shell that is, and if it can determine that and access it, it will run the script under the shell that's specified in the user profile. If it can't, then it will just default back to K-shell. Another feature that we've been working on for a while now and can actually be fairly powerful for those of you leveraging agents is this concept of an agent image. So we wanted the ability for folks to be able to take an agent and reconfigure it to a new domain The idea being, if I needed to put an agent in a VM image and then, obviously clone that VM out within my environment, I don't want to have to go to each and every VM and essentially do a full reinstall in order to get that agent configured. So what this allows you to do is either from a secure or a non-secure install, if you have an agent that's fully configured and functioning, you can, from the command line, tell that agent to essentially generate an image of itself. And that's essentially a zip file that can then be used and deployed as part of a image, or you can just put it directly onto a server. And then from the command line in that folder structure, you can essentially tell that agent to connect to a specific domain, and it doesn't have to be obviously it could be the same domain in which it was previously configured, but it can support a new domain. And then with the appropriate login credentials, the agent will then essentially go in and configure itself to be associated with that new domain. So that essentially allows, if you use something like VM and you provision a VM image and you set up your run once capabilities to essentially say, here, I need to run this command line for configuring my agent. Essentially, when you deploy that image, you can auto-configure that agent into a domain of your choice. And then finally, we added some enhanced password management. So now, if in EEM you configure the option to, say, change your password at the next login, that will be reflected in PAM the next time you attempt to log in. And we've also added an alternative login screen that you can access via the web UI, where instead of just getting the normal username password prompt, it's actually a prompt that allows you to change your password, and PAM will update your password for PAM in EEM. In terms of certifications, we did some work to recertify the Spectrum IM and Remedy Gateway with the latest versions of AutoSys and PMC Remedy. So it's been certified with AutoSys 9.3 and Remedy 8.1. We went and did specific certifications for Oracle RAC. We supported Oracle RAC, but we've had some outstanding issues with such processes when failover occurs, database failover. We have, in 4.2.2, we went and did a full certification of PAM in an Oracle RAC environment and also addressed those failover issues with stuck processes. And we've done the same thing with Microsoft SQL Cluster as well. And then finally, for 4.2.2, we have certified support for Oracle Enterprise Linux. We did not officially support this prior to 4.2.2. This is not something that is in our long-term strategy path. So we don't know. We don't have we're not saying we're going to support this until the end of time, but at least for the next several releases, we will have some level of support for both agents and orchestrators on Oracle Enterprise Linux. In terms of key bug fixes, there are really three areas. One primarily around recovery. There were several issues that we found that were related to recovery and stuck processes and stuck tasks. But there was just an underlying issue related to all of these, where what we were seeing was, over time, there's a table in our database called the recovery state table. It would accumulate redundant entries. So essentially, if I had, a run script operator, there would be and that was in the running state, there would be an entry in the recovery state table for that operator. And then if something went wrong, you would get a second or a third or a fourth entry for that same operator. And obviously, if there's only one instance of it, it doesn't need to be recovered 4 times. So you would have redundant entries. And so over time, this table would grow, exceedingly large and would cause startup to be slow and sometimes even fail, as well as high CPU usage. And when this would occur, you would also see, the PAM UI would also be unresponsive at times as well. So what we've done is we've addressed the root cause that was causing the accumulation of these redundant entries. And we've also provided support with a tool to clean up these entries if we find, an environment, a customer environment where they have a fairly large number of these entries and they're impacting performance. Another issue that we encountered with 4.2 and 4.2 SP1 as folks were upgrading to these releases revolved around support for EEM, and specifically EEM versions 12.1 and 12.5.x. So in 4.2 and 4.2.1, we added support for the 12.5 SDK. However, we were, as part of our installer, if someone was using EEM version 12.1.x, we were incorrectly installing the 12.5 SDK, which is not compatible with EEM 12.1. For 12.1, PAM would still need to use the 8.4 EEM SDK. And so when that wrong SDK was laid down, there would just be issues with PAM starting up, and you essentially couldn't get the product to work. So in 4.2.2, we've essentially corrected that mapping in the installer, so the installer will now lay down the appropriate version of the SDK when it sees 12.1.x versus 12.5.x. And then in I believe it was 4.2, we introduced a new data set locking mechanism that was optimized for situations where, essentially I have one process or, essentially one source that might be updating or modifying a data set, but I have several other processes that are out there reading from this data set. So instead of having, one global lock across all data sets that all activities, including read activities, had to share, which obviously was a huge bottleneck in terms of performance, you could specify that you wanted to use a new data set locking mechanism, which essentially had per name data set locks, and those locks were such that you could get a read-only access, of which there were multiple threads could use a read-only access, and then truly have a global lock just for someone that is modifying the data set. What we uncovered were there were some issues in terms of updates we were writing back when dealing with the Oracle databases, and in certain conditions those updates could be lost. We've uncovered the root cause of that and fixed that in 4.2.2, so those merging issues are no longer an issue with this new locking mechanism with Oracle. So in terms of the upgrade, because of the changes that we made in the archiving engine, as well as a few other changes that we made in other areas, there's some significant database manipulation that has to take on an upgrade. So, obviously, if you're just installing PAM for the first time, it'll just be like, any other clean install. There are no issues there. It's only if you have, an existing PAM installation that's probably been running for some amount of time and under heavy load, and you have a fairly large runtime environment that hasn't been archived, in which case, actually moving all of those records into a separate table and modifying the schema of those tables to support the new database methodology for archiving in the execution engine could take a significantly longer time in comparison to other service packs that we released. So we're talking, upwards of several hours in certain instances. And because it can take, a fairly long time, we've provided a utility that can be accessed either as a standalone utility that you can run from the command line. You just have to pass your database credentials to the command line, or it can be launched from the installation, from the 422 installer itself. And what it will do is, in your environment, it will go out and essentially check the size of the relevant tables, and do some basic test operations and give you a rough estimate of approximately how long it thinks it will take to perform an upgrade in that environment. For the recovery state issue, we've also, as I mentioned earlier, we've provided our support and SE teams with a tool that can be used to clean up those recovery tables. So if in your existing environment, you are, when PAM starts up, if it seems to be, exceptionally slow in starting up, it could be the case that you have this issue with redundant rows in your C2O recovery state table. If that's the case, simply contact support. They can verify if that's an issue and then work with you to execute this tool to help clean up those redundant issues from the recovery table. And I believe that's it. So that's all we had in 4.2.2. As I said earlier, it's a pretty healthy size service pack for the reasons I mentioned earlier. And I really wanted to take this time to discuss those new capabilities with you guys, as well as just to give you a heads up around the fact that because of the changes that we've made in 4.2.2 to optimize some of the performance and execution, that for those of you with fairly large installs, existing installations, the upgrade to 4.2.2 could take, considerably longer than normal. And it's not unanticipated, so we don't want folks going in and hey, this thing has been running for 2 hours, canceling out of the install because they think something's wrong. It's just a case that you probably have a large amount of data in your runtime table, and that's the reason why we've added the tool to provide you an estimate, so you won't be caught by surprise and you can plan accordingly in terms of setting up your maintenance windows for the upgrade. So with that, I will pause and take questions.
If you'd like to ask an audio question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. Once again, that's star 1. We'll pause for just a moment to compile the Q&A roster. Once again, if you'd like to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. And at this time, there are no questions.
Gordon, I had a question come in from Martin D. Ritter. We've experienced issues with 4.2 integration from service desk to PAM over HTTPS due to looks like Java version that PAM uses. It looks like PAM no longer accepts a certificate based on authentication where we never had these issues with older PAM versions. Has this been fixed in 4.2.2?
I don't. So I'm not sure what the specific issue is here. I do know that we didn't do anything with any changes to certificate-based authentication in 4.2.2. That doesn't mean it hasn't been fixed in 4.2.1 or in some other hot fix. I think the best thing, if we're still experiencing that issue, reach out to support, and I can ask our dev team to see if they're aware of this issue and if there's something that we either have done or are looking to do to address it.
And once again, if you would like to ask an audio question, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad.
So in terms of certification, so I'll answer it this way. 4.2.2 is supported with 12.7 and 12.9 of catalog service desk. The service desk and service catalog teams have not certified this release yet. I don't know when their plans are to actually perform official certification, but you can use it, and we've tested it on our side within the PAM as part of just our release. We've done some testing, vanity testing with 12.7 and 12.9, and we haven't seen any issues. So you can upgrade to 4.2.2, get support, and if there's an issue, we will fix it. If it's a bug. Does the improved event system support FIFO? It's a good question, Hendry. We put it this way: we haven't changed it. I know resources were not FIFO. I thought events were, but I'll have to check. We haven't changed how that aspect of it works, but I thought it was first in, first out for the events, just not for resources.
And we have no audio questions at this time.
We also have 2 questions in the Q&A panel.
So the question is, if load balancing is at the process level, what happens when a child subprocess is called? As long as the child or subprocess is not in line, it will be treated just like any other process. It will be load balanced. If it's configured as inline, then it's not really a separate process at the engine level. It's just part of the parent process, so there will be no load balancing performed. Yes, which kind of answers the second question, which is, does the child process run on the same node as the parent, or is it load balanced? So it will run on the same node as the parent if it's inline. Otherwise, it will be load balanced, and it can run on the same node, or it could be assigned to a different node.
Gordon, can you see the other questions in the Q&A? The first one is, the Eclipse plugin will only be available on version 4.3.
Okay, hold on. All right, so before that, our 4.2 patches that have not been patched in 4.2 okay to be applied. There shouldn't be any patches. Put it this way, 4.2.2 is cumulative of all patches and hotfixes released prior to 4.2.2. So anything that was patched in 4.2 or 4.2 SP1 should already be included in the install of 4.2.2. For the Eclipse plugin, we'll do, on the next webcast, we'll probably do an update on our next release. So previously we were planning our next release to be 4.3 and to come out in October. Because we did 4.2.2, we're sort of altering the plan for the next release, and it's actually going to be bigger than what we had originally scoped in terms of marquee features, and we'll do probably a early broadcast of what we're planning for that. But instead of it being 4.3, we're actually going to call it 5.0. The Eclipse plugin for building connectors is still in scope for that release, and we're planning when it will come out, but we're targeting first half of next calendar year is sort of the time frame that we're targeting for the next release. No, so in terms of estimating the upgrade time on an existing instance of PAM.3.1, yes, so the tool that will be used to give you an estimate of your upgrade, it's part of the installer, or you can run it as a separate command line utility, and you can run it against 3.1, 4.0, 4.1, and 4.1 SP1. The requirements for clustering PAM in 4.2.2, there have been no changes in terms of the requirements or how you configure clustering. This is all internal within the engine, and it doesn't affect the load balancers or anything at that level. So, if you think about it, the load balancers and like Apache, F5, Nginx, they're principally focused at balancing inbound connections to PAM and connections to the various nodes. They don't necessarily impact how the orchestrators assign work. That's all done at the JBoss app server level, and that's all configuration that we've changed, and how we want to perform that load balancing is all internal to the engine. So anything that you had to previously do in order to configure load balancing, it's the same set of steps, same requirements for 4.2.2 as they were previously. Also, how do you perform maintenance on a cluster node? Is data lost if you reboot? I'm not going to attempt to. I know there's a full process defined in the doc set on how to actually upgrade a cluster node or perform maintenance. So I'll refer you to that for the exact steps. But the question about is data lost if you reboot the node, which is processing workflows. Theoretically, no. So still at the engine level, and more importantly at the recovery level, which is what has to happen if, when you bring a node down, anything that it is working on has to be recovered and then assigned to a separate node. that's still done at the operator level. And so as long as the operator is assigned to an agent, or if it's performing something on that particular orchestrator itself, so let's say if you're doing a calc operation, you know, that calc operation would need to complete before the agent, before the orchestrator actually shut down, in order to not lose that data. Otherwise, you know, if it's in the middle of that action, then it will be restarted, and whether or not it properly recovers then becomes a question of what you're doing in the calc operation. So if it's actually just performing some calculations, that's one thing. If it's updating a data set and then reading from something else and then doing other additional updates, then depending on how far it went in that actual operation, you could get partial updates done, but the calc not complete, and then it will attempt to do it again. So in general, if you're you know, performing maintenance, it's best if you can at least get to the point where you don't have any running operations on the node that's being shut down. You know, it's fine if they're running on an agent, or it's fine if they're scheduled to run or completed. But you know, if you can avoid having them, you know, actually running on that node, that's the best way to ensure you don't have any unanticipated side effects by the recovery occurring and moving those to a different node. Okay, so I think the only one left is, will the presentation be made available? And I'm pretty sure the answer to that is yes. Yes. Mary, we'll post this to the community site?
Yes, we'll post the recording and the presentation to the community site in the next 24 hours. Darla, one last call for questions.
If you would like to ask an audio question, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. And we have no audio questions at this time.
Okay, well, if there's no more questions, we have a poll to fill out at the bottom right corner of the screen. You can fill that out. We'll post the presentation in the community, and we thank you for your participation today.
This concludes today's conference call. You may now disconnect.